Chapter 10. So, I had considered myself the center of the universe, the bullseye, so to speak, for all the slings and arrows the building had to offer. And all along, I was nothing, just one of a series, another copy, a stereotype, trembling in all places my predecessors trembled, repeating like a record player exactly the same words, feelings, thoughts. My melodramatic actions, the sudden impulses, false starts, surprises, moments of inspiration, each successive revelation, all of it, chapter and verse, including this present moment, was in the instructions. It's not time yet? Yes, we're recording. Background? No background. Nobody liked it anyway. I didn't like it. So if this was neither a test nor a mission nor chaos, what was left? The bathroom? The corridors? Going from door to door? From door to door? Why had he told me so much? He too, of course, was part of the instructions, appearing like a note in a musical score, a note whose turn had come. And he played it well, the old veteran, but why? Where was all this heading? I slid down from the tub and lay on the floor for a while, my feet propped up on the toilet. How disgusting it all was. Quadruples, triplets, what did it mean? Maybe nothing, just a diversion. Diversion from what? Apple strudel, window dressing, burning bushes. It made me dizzy. What about that cauliflower that gave me nightmares? And eating regularly, cookies and milk and cake and onions. Were they all crazy? Were they out to make me crazy too? Then everything would be fine. If everyone's crazy, no one's crazy. But where's it all heading? I looked at my watch. Stopped. Even it had betrayed me. I tore it off my wrist and tossed it into the toilet. Let the sanitation department fish it out and examine it. Where's the razor? He'd taken it, robbed me, trying to provoke me to do what? Yes, of course, perfect, full speed ahead. I left the bathroom whistling. I smiled at all the officers I passed. I took an elevator. No one in the corridor upstairs. So much the better, so much the worse. I entered the office. Empty, not a sign of Major Erms. I went to his desk, yanked the drawers out, turned them upside down, shook everything out onto the floor, onto the chair, papers everywhere, a whirling cloud of paper. The door squeaked open and I saw Major Erms' face, his blue eyes wide with surprise. What are you doing? You bastard! I roared, lunging at him. We fell and rolled through secret documents. I had him by the throat. I kicked him. I bit him, but it was all over in a moment. People came running up. Someone pulled me back by the collar. Someone else threw a cup of cold coffee in my face. And Major Erms got up, pale and shaking, and they helped him gather up his papers. I spat out a couple of ribbons I had bitten off his jacket and shrieked while they held me down. Finish me off, villains, dogs, finish me off. Yes, I plotted, I conspired. I'm an agent of foreign power. I aided, I abetted, I committed treason. Yes, I confess. Shoot me, torture me, finish me off. Several people passed by the open door, but no one looked in, even though I was bellowing at the top of my lungs. Finally, thoroughly hoarse and exhausted, I could only gasp like a fish out of water. Someone in white approached me from the side, rolled up the sleeve of my jacket. I saw a moon face with glasses, felt something stab my arm, then an odd warmth spreading out. Tally-ho! I cried as everything faded away. Bless you, murderers, bless you. I came to slowly, by degrees. I was enormous. Not that I'd become a giant, my body hadn't grown, but the I who was now thinking, was a space equivalent in volume to the space surrounding me, if not larger. I didn't move a muscle, yet my inner being encompassed the myriad levels of the white labyrinth. Snugly ensconced in the warm depths of myself between my powerful walls, I considered my recent trials and tribulations with infinite patience and pity. Bathtub, welcome. Gradually I dwindled, tightened up, somehow returned to my old self. I was lying on a hard, uncomfortable bed. I moved my fingers. They stuck together. The coffee thrown at me must have had sugar in it. I lifted my head. It wobbled, as if it hadn't been properly screwed on. I sat up and leaned against a cold, tiled wall. This wasn't a bathroom. I was on a vinyl couch, fairly high off the ground. The room was long and narrow, at the corner of a small desk behind the screen. Oh, I skipped a line there. The room was long and narrow, had white chairs and a folding screen at one end. I could see the corner of a small desk behind the screen. On a metal cart at my side were medicine bottles, a hypodermic syringe, assorted surgical instruments. Obviously a doctor's office. Then I recalled what had just happened. So instead of throwing me in jail, they were treating me? What next? Still in a daze, I tried to figure out why there were only 10 bottles on the cart when there were supposed to be 19. At the same time, I knew perfectly well that this didn't make any sense. Someone behind the screen was looking at me. I saw the top of a head and the glint of glasses. It was the doctor who had given me the injection. "How are you feeling?" he asked, coming out. "Fine, thanks." A small man in white, on the plump side, eager to please, pink complexion. There were dark, intelligent eyes behind those thick horn-rimmed glasses. The nose was a round button, and there was a dimple in the chin. In the opening of his white coat, I could see a green polka-dot tie, and when he came nearer, the lapels of a uniform. He pulled up a stool next to my couch, sat down, and took my pulse. "I'm all right," I said when he brought out a stethoscope from the pocket of his coat. "Of course," he replied in a smooth and pleasant voice. "Do you remember everything?" "Yes." "Wonderful, that's a very good sign. You're going through a most difficult and most complicated period, adjusting to a new environment, etc. Many things disturb the equilibrium, and then there's all that secrecy to contend with, how our psyche hates it. We have a stubborn, rebellious nature. The minute it's presented with anything forbidden, all hell breaks loose, you see. Perfectly normal reaction, though not exactly encouraged around here. We can help you." "How?" I asked. I still had on my trousers and shirt, but my jacket was hanging on the wall, and someone had taken off my shoes. I felt stupid without them. "You're an intelligent man," he said with a broad smile, making a dimple in his left cheek. "And intelligence demands a certain skepticism, a normal, healthy skepticism. Now, we're not omnipotent, Lord knows. If you don't object, of course, we could sit down and have a little talk, just between us, you understand. But perhaps you'd like to wash up first, a bath?" "That's a good idea. I'm sticky from the coffee." "Oh, let's not even mention that incident. I'll just say the major did ask me to tell you that he fully understands, and there'll be no trouble on that score, none whatsoever." "What?" I asked dully. He blinked. "The little scene we had. You lost your temper. One might say even lost your head. There were certain disappointments, I suppose. We needn't go into it. But the major asked me to give you a few words of encouragement. He thinks quite highly of you, you know." "You said something about a bath?" I interrupted, beginning to feel not unlike that spy in the bathroom. I got down from the couch. Whatever was in the injection had completely worn off. The doctor directed me through a side door to the bathroom. I hung my clothes up in a little closet, gave myself a good scrubbing, and then took a cold shower. Feeling worlds better, I threw on a loose bathrobe which was folded over a chair nearby. Went back to the closet and found it empty. Just then I heard a cautious knock. "It's me," came the doctor's voice from behind the door. "Can I come in?" I opened the door. "My clothes," I said, confronting him. "Oh, yes, I forgot to tell you. The nurse took them to sew on a button, or maybe they needed some ironing." "Searching without a warrant?" I asked, unconcerned. He flinched. "Still some traces of shock," he muttered to himself. "I'll prescribe a tranquilizer for you, yes. And now, if you don't mind, I'll examine you." I let him test my reflexes and listen to my heart. He nodded vigorously. "Excuse me." "Wonderful," he exclaimed. "You're in splendid shape. Now, let's go to my office. The nurse will bring your clothes presently. This way, please." We went down a narrow hall to a dim room with a green lamp on the desk and massive bookcases filled with volumes bound in leather, the titles all in gold. Near one bookcase stood a round table with a skull in the middle and 2 armchairs. I took a seat. The books behind the glass seemed to breathe gloom. The doctor hung up his white coat, and I saw that he wasn't in uniform after all, but was wearing an ordinary gray suit. He sat across the table from me and watched me carefully for a considerable time. "And now," he said at last, as if my face had passed inspection, "perhaps we can discuss what prompted that little outburst of yours. In the privacy of my office, of course." And he indicated the long, dark rows of books with a wave of the arm. "Feel free to tell me everything." He waited for me to start. When I didn't, he said, Oh, you don't trust me. Perfectly natural. I would feel the same in your place, I'm sure. But believe me, you must try to overcome this compulsion to be silent. It's important that you try. The first step is always the most difficult. That's not it, I said. Thing is, I don't know if it's really worth it. Anyway, you took me by surprise. Just a while ago, you were saying you didn't want to hear about it. You must forgive me, he said, showing his dimples. Before anything else, I'm a doctor. In the other room, I wasn't sure you'd completely recovered. I didn't want to excite you by stirring up painful memories. But now that I've examined you, I know that I not only can, but that I should. Of course, I don't insist, but if you're willing to cooperate... Very well, I said. I'll talk, but it's a long story. I'm all ears. What was there to lose? I began at the beginning, summarized my interview with the commander-in-chief, told about the mission, my instructions, all the complications, told him about the little old man, the officers, the priest, all my suspicions, except those touching Major Erms. Also about the spy sleeping in the bathroom and our odd conversation. But I no longer followed what I was saying, having realized that without mention of the fact that I'd caught Major Erms copying secret documents, my attack on him appeared insane. So I tried to find some aspects of my conversation with the spy in the bathroom which might justify, at least to some extent, my mad behavior. But my arguments were unconvincing, even to myself, and the more I talked, the less I seemed to say. Yet I plowed on grimly, getting in deeper and deeper, convinced that I was only providing additional evidence that I was not in full possession of my senses. While I talked, the doctor picked up the skull. It served as a paperweight, and put it down in different positions. Sometimes it was in profile to me, sometimes it stared at me with its gaping eyes. When I finished, he sat back in his chair, clasped his hands, and said in his smooth voice, "As far as I can see, your doubts concerning the importance, and for that matter the very existence of your mission, are generated by an exceptionally high number of apparently accidental meetings with traitors. And in such a short time, too, correct?" More or less. I was recovering somewhat from the feeling that I had put myself in his hands. The empty eyes of the skull looked into mine. The smooth bones seemed to glow. Now, you say the little old man was a traitor. Your own conclusion? The captain who shot himself told me. He told you, and then shot himself? Did you see the actual shooting? Yes, that is, I heard the shot in the next room, then the thud of his falling body, and through a crack in the door I saw his leg. That is a shoe. Ah, and before that, the officer who was serving as your guide was arrested. Could you describe that arrest? 2 officers approached us. They took him aside and talked with him. I don't know what they said. I couldn't hear. Then the first officer took him away, and the second went with me. Did anyone tell you that this was an arrest? Well, no. So you couldn't really swear to it? I guess not, but the circumstances, and particularly when you consider what happened later. One thing at a time. You say the captain told you about the little old man, and then you heard a shot, saw a shoe, and concluded that the captain himself was a traitor. As far as your guide is concerned... That's a fun sound. As far as your guide is concerned, all you really know is that he was called away. Not much to go on, is it? Who's left? The spy in the bathroom. You found him asleep? Yes. What would he be doing in the bathroom after photographing such vital documents? And taking a nap, too. The door wasn't locked, was it? It's true, it wasn't. Yeah, that was on my end. Are you still convinced that these were all traitors? I was silent. There, you see, jumping to conclusions. One moment, I interrupted. Assuming they weren't traitors, how do you explain all this? What was it, a play put on just for my benefit? But why? To what end? He smiled, all dimples, and said, "Who knows? Perhaps they were inoculating you against treason by applying it in small doses. For that matter, even a man like Major Erms might do something you'd think suspicious, something a bit unusual, but surely you wouldn't take him for a traitor. Or would you?" He watched me closely. How icily the eyes gleamed in that round and pleasant face. He didn't wait for an answer. There remains one more nut for us to crack. The hardest. Your instructions. They were in code, naturally. Were you able to take a good look at them? Are you absolutely sure they were a written account of your every movement and thought in the building? Well, no, I replied reluctantly. There was only time to read a paragraph or two. It had something about my going from office to office and people ignoring me, then about how vast and impersonal the building was, operating in a random way. I can't recall the exact words, but I know they were practically taken out of my mouth. That was all you managed to read? Yes. Also, from time to time, people I meet make allusions to my experiences in the building, even my very thoughts. Prannell, for example. I told you about him. All he did was give you a sample of code, a demonstration. It seemed that way at first, but the sample happened to answer the question in my mind. Are you aware that superstitious people, when they find themselves in a critical period of their lives, often open the Bible at random to get some indication, some sign on which to predicate their future actions? Yes, I've heard of that. You don't think it could be of real help? Certainly not. It's a matter of pure luck which passage you open to. And in your case, couldn't that be pure luck too? An accident? There have been too many accidents, I said. He didn't believe me. The mere facts I could give him, but the diabolical aura that surrounded them, that I was unable to convey. The doctor beamed. What you've told me, he said, is no illusion or hallucination, I'm sure, but you do jump to conclusions. You're in such a terrible hurry to understand everything at once, to anticipate. I imagine they wish to develop certain qualities in you: an alert mind, the capacity for objective observation, attention to detail, the ability to distinguish the important from the unimportant, and many, many other things that will be indispensable in your work. I would say then that this was not, as you called it, a test, but rather a period of training. And training, when intensive, may sometimes bring one to the point of exhaustion, which is exactly what happened in your case. I gazed into the empty eyes of the skull, no longer caring. But do forgive us about your clothes, said the doctor, beaming too much. The nurse should be bringing them in any minute now. He kept talking. A thought occurred to me, vague, difficult to put into words. Do you have a section around here for the mentally ill? I asked. He blinked. Certainly we do, he replied kindly. It's a regular ward, but with just a few beds. Does that interest you? Who was it that said the spirit of an age speaks through its madness? An exaggeration, I'm sure, but if you'd like to see our ward, conduct your own observations firsthand. I have no objections. You'll be here for a while anyway. What? It would be advisable, but please understand, we're by no means holding you here. So, you think that I began calmly. He shuddered. The dimples vanished. Heavens, no, nothing of the kind. You're simply overworked, that's all. To prove it, I'm prepared to conduct you ad alteram mente captorum. Though, actually, we have only a few patients at the moment, all rather ordinary cases. Catatonia provocatia, some residual obsessions, nervous tics, compulsive winking and the like, collaboration, dissociation, top priority hysteria, all according to the textbook. Quite boring, really. Now he was warming up. Recently, however, we acquired a fairly interesting case, a 3-personality syndrome, trypsicomia, folie en trois, Dreiniger-Wassen, as it's variously called. 2 personalities continually unmask each other, and the third gnaws at his arms and legs to keep from taking sides. Actually, it's nothing but reservatio mentalis, with a few complications. You might be interested in a condition called mania autopersecutoria, that is, a self-interrogation fit. The patient cross-examines himself, mutually, mind you, for up to 40 hours without stopping, until he drops. Finally, we have a curious little item, autocryptic withdrawal. Oh? I said, indifferent. The patient hides himself in his own body, the doctor explained, his face flushed with excitement. He compresses his identity to such a degree that he thinks, for example, he's the malleus, the little hammer-shaped bone in the middle ear, and that all the other parts of the body are enemy agents out to get him. At the moment, unfortunately, I can't take you on a tour of our ward. I have rounds to make elsewhere. Wait here, the nurse will bring your clothes. In the meantime, you're welcome to look at my library. All I ask is that you try to relax, please. I was standing near the chair, feeling awkward in a bathrobe several sizes too large. The doctor shook my hand with his warm, plump hand and said, "Chin up. Fewer suspicions, more simple courage, and everything will be fine, you see." "Thanks," I mumbled. At the door, he smiled again, waved, and left. I stood around for a while, waiting for the nurse and my clothes, then went back to the table and took a good look at the skull. It grinned at me with a full set of big white teeth. Curious, I picked it up and snapped the jaw a few times. It was on a spring. There were hinges on the sides. The temples, the whole top came off like a lid. That is, could come off. I didn't care to open it. I liked the skull as it was, spherical. I admired the shine. How elegantly the parietal bones fitted into the frontal. How smoothly the jagged edges interlocked. The occipital, on the other hand, was an enchanting moonscape with its many articulations and indentations. Mounds, peaks, ravines, and that mighty crater, the foramen magnum, the gate for the spinal column. And where was the spine now? I sat, my elbows on the table, and meditated on the skulls. Still no nurse. I thought about various things. For instance, I knew a man once who suffered from a skeleton complex, his own. Or rather, a skeleton phobia, since it terrified him so much that he never spoke of it, and even avoided touching himself, in order to not feel beneath the soft envelope of flesh the hardness which waited to be free. I thought about how the skull was a symbol of death for us, a warning on a bottle of poison. Centuries ago, the skeletons in anatomical classes were not depicted in such stiff poses of warning, but were shown in attitudes of life. Some danced, some leaned, their tibiae casually crossed, on sarcophagi while they directed their keen, albeit funereal eye sockets straight at the reader. I even recalled a woodcut of two skeletons according. One of them was plainly bashful. But here was a contemporary skull, clean, hygienic, scrubbed, the balustrades of cheekbones nice and sleek, making little balconies beneath each orbital cavity. The nasal hole was a bit unpleasant, but then, who's without some minor blemish? And the smile made one stop and think. I lifted the skull, weighed it in my hand, rapped it with a knuckle, and then quickly bent over and sniffed. Only dust. Harmless everyday dust tickling the nostrils, but then a whiff, a trace of something, until my nose touched the cold surface and I inhaled, yes, the faintest stink, another sniff. Foul play! Corruption! The reek betrayed the crime within. Like a drunkard, I breathed in the bloodiest, most hideous murders behind that ivory elegance. I sniffed again, the gleam, the polish, the whiteness, all a vile hoax, sickening, horrible. I sniffed again, greedily, in terror, then hurled it on the table and frantically wiped my face, my hands with the corner of my robe. But something drew me to it still. How it drew me. The nurse entered with my suit, carefully brushed and pressed. It looked like new. She placed it on the table by the skull, nodded stiffly, and left. Whew, end of chapter 10. Alright, this is why I wanted to get started right away. Chapter 11, I think, is the longest chapter in the book. We won't be finishing today for sure. Right? Let me check. Yeah, let's see. Oh my god. What if I speed run? Well, we have 3 chapters left. Let's see. Let's do the math here a little bit, or let's get an idea of the math anyway. I just read 12 pages, and it took me 20 minutes. Chapter 11 is 30 pages, so it'll take me more than 40 minutes, which is about how much longer I usually go for, give or take time to finish whatever chapter we're on. I usually go till, for about an hour in total. And this chapter alone will probably take us well over the rest of that time. And then there's 2 more. So we'll be finishing it next week. Today we're just going to work on chapter 11. Chapter 11. I dressed in an adjoining bathroom, leaving the door ajar so I could keep an eye on the skull. My baleful beauty, I thought. What sweet revulsion to stare at you like this. How you thrill and chill me. But it wasn't the skull I feared. I feared myself. What was drawing me to it, that well-boiled chunk of bone? What made it so attractive? What enticed me to sniff in a frenzy of disgust? The death that necessarily produced the skull? No, that death had no connection with this posthumous paperweight, nor with me for that matter. I could understand at least why in the old days, long ago, they drank their wine from skull caps. It added spice. I was thinking in this vein when suddenly a door squeaked open and someone entered the doctor's office. I closed my door a crack and cautiously peeked out. There were two of them in bright pajamas. One had red hair, unevenly red, as if dyed and fading in spots. He was bending over and trying to read the titles of the doctor's books. The other one was on the heavy side and had eyelids the color of strong tea. He sat at the table with the skull and said, "Come on, you should have it down by now." I adjusted my tie and walked in. The one who was sitting hardly looked at me. His neck was oddly white and flabby under that sunburnt, weather-beaten face. "Want to play?" he asked, taking out a small tumbler from the pocket of his fuchsia pajamas, unscrewing it, rolling the dice out on the table. "What do we play for?" I asked, hesitant. "The stars, of course. Highest number wins, winner names the stakes." He was already shaking the dice, rattling the bones. I said nothing. He threw them and counted. 11. "Your turn." He handed me the tumbler. I shook it and rolled 2 deuces and a 4. "I win," he shouted. "Okay, this time Malenflor. He's a good one." This time he threw 13. "5 short," he said with a grin. I threw 2 5s and a 6. "Hell," he said. "All right, you name it." "I don't know," I muttered. "Go on, don't be bashful." "The Admiral." "You aim high." He threw 7. It was my turn again. 2 5s, but the third die rolled off the table and fell at the feet of the one who was looking at the books, his back to us. "What is it, cremator?" asked my partner, not getting up. "A 6, the other answered. "What luck?" smiled my partner, displaying a set of rotten teeth. "Well?" "A star," I began. "For 16, you can name a constellation." "Constellation?" "The gold spectacles," I said on impulse. He blinked. He squinted at me, and the other came up and said, "No sense playing anymore. Doctor's here." He had a slight stutter and the face of an old squirrel. Buck teeth, pointed whiskers, and tiny, dull eyes surrounded by wrinkles. "We haven't been introduced," he said. "I'm Semperak, the senior cremator. Semperak with a Q." I mumbled my name and we shook hands. The other asked, "So, where's the doctor?" And he gave the dice a rattle. "He'll be along. And you're an ambulatory?" "I suppose," I said. "We too. Came straight from work. Saves time that way. Quite a convenience. You don't happen to have a mirror, do you?" "Stop it," said the doctor. Semperak ignored him. "I should have one somewhere." I searched my pockets, then handed him a small square mirror, scratched up quite a bit from long use. He looked himself over carefully and made a series of faces, as if trying to decide which was ugliest. "Excellent," he said. "It's been years since I looked so old." "And you're glad of it?" "Oh, yes, even if I never see him again, this way at least." "See home? See whom?" "But you know, of course, it's my brother, my twin brother. He's on a mission, so I may never see him again. This way at least. He did me dirt, you see. I can follow his misfortune." "Stop it," said the other, clearly annoyed. I studied them both. Semperak, though fairly thin and with a sunken chest, bore a striking resemblance to his heavy companion. In fact, they were as alike as 2 suits of slightly different cut, but in exactly the same stage of wear, or as 2 clerks grown old together at adjacent desks. What had dried up and wrinkled over in one sagged and folded in the other. Semperak, however, tried to preserve a certain style. Every now and then he would smooth his mustache with a finger, or reach to adjust his collar, which wasn't there, since now he had on pajamas, chartreuse, and silver. So, you're going for treatments too? He said, trying to resume our conversation. Another game? The other asked with a nasal twang. Not the bones again, Semperak sneered. Can't you think up something else? An eye peered into the room through the keyhole and then vanished. There's Dolt, grumbled the other, up to his old tricks. The door opened and a man in... How do you pronounce the word that's spelled P-U-C-E? I feel like I could say something really weird if I do that wrong. Or right. It's a color. I hate both of you. I'm just gonna fucking look it up. Everybody's trolling me tonight.
Puce.
Okay. The door opened and a man in puce pajamas sauntered in, his clothes folded over one arm and the other holding a briefcase and a thermos. He was tall, painfully thin, his nose and Adam's apple jutted out like bent knives, and his eyes were pale and vacant, a peculiar contrast to his lively manner, particularly when he threw his head back and cried, "Greetings, greetings, comrades and accomplices. When the doctor's called away, the patients will play." I told you. You said pews. It's puce. It's not pews. What, another attack? The heavy one asked calmly. Who can say? Brain failure, I suspect. But why wait, gentlemen? There's so much merry to make. Same old dolt, sighed the heavy one, getting up. One drunken orgy after another. Semperak touched his mustache pensively. You are reading my pronunciation wrong? No, you wrote the word pews. That's a word in the English language. And it's not pronounced the same way as puce. It's not a me thing. Just us? Just us and a recruit to fill the cup. An able lad. Come, brave hearts, let's be off. I tried to slip away unnoticed, but just then he turned his watery eyes to me. What's this, a new man? He said with an exaggerated warmth. We'd love to have you. A shot, a little harmless cheer, good for what ails you. You must join us. I started to excuse myself, but was already arm in arm with the fuchsia pajamas and the puce pajamas, marching out the door, still protesting, and down the narrow corridor, the chartreuse pajamas went ahead and slammed the doors left and right along the way, and the slamming echoed up and down the entire level, announcing our mad progress. One door bounced back open, revealing a large room full of old women in shawls and high-buttoned shoes. Their voices blended into one complaining and quarrelsome sound as we passed. What was that? I asked. Busybodies, said the cremator. We keep 'em in reserve. This way, please. And he pushed me forward. I got a good whiff of his cheap hair tonic and smells of ink and soap. The heavy one became strangely animated, began to bounce along, waving his arms and whistling, until, at the last door, he stopped and adjusted his pajamas with great ceremony, cleared his throat, and with even greater ceremony, threw the door open. Welcome, welcome to our humble abode. The walls were bare. There was a huge, old-fashioned cupboard in the corner, and a banquet table stood in the middle of the room, its snow-white cloth covered with gleaming bottles and endless platters of food. In the far corner, a young man with flowing hair, also in pajamas, was struggling with a stack of folding chairs, the kind one sees in outdoor cafes. He was opening and testing them, and raising a terrible racket in the process. The heavy one went to give him a hand, and the tall, emaciated organizer of this odd celebration, the one they called Dolt, folded his arms across his chest like a general on a hilltop, and surveyed the richly laden table, as if it were tomorrow's battlefield. Excuse me, said a voice behind me, and I made way for the smiling young man who was carrying several bottles of wine. He put them down and introduced himself. Clapperschlang, he said, shaking my hand and blushing. A trainee as of yesterday. He couldn't have been more than 20. His thick black hair curled around the pale forehead and fell to ears and pretty ringlets. Comrades and accomplices, take your seats, Dolt announced, rubbing his hands together. We hardly had time to settle ourselves in those terribly rickety chairs when he filled our glasses and raised his own with a greedy, lopsided smile and yelled, "Gentlemen, the building!" "The building!" we roared in one voice, clicked our glasses, and drank. Whatever it was, it started a slow fire inside. Dolt refilled our glasses, licked his lips, made another toast, louder than the first, and emptied his glass in one swallow. The cremator sprawled in his chair, stuffed himself with hors d'oeuvres, and with considerable finesse spit olive pits in the young man's direction. Dolt refilled and refilled. It was growing hot, and though the alcohol didn't seem to affect me, everything began to merge into a thick, shimmering liquid. Yeah, it sounds like the alcohol's not affecting you, dude. The second the glasses were filled, they had to be emptied, as if there were some great urgency about it, as if they expected someone to rush in and call a halt to the proceedings. And their gaiety was unnaturally wild for so few drinks. "What kind of cake is this, triple layer?" asked the heavy one, with his mouth full. "No, triple agent," quipped Dolt, and the cremator laughed and broke into a volley of drunken jokes and off-colored nursery rhymes. "Your health, Dolt, and yours, you old necrophiliac," roared the heavy one. "Please, a thanatophile," said the cremator, reproachful. Conversation became impossible. Even shouts got lost in the confusion. There was toast after toast, down the hatch and bottoms up, and the jokes grew so awful that I had to drink to hide my disgust. Dolt sang in a piercing falsetto and performed an obscene dance with his fingers across the tabletop, while the cremator guzzled vodka and threw whole olives at the young man, who sat there in a stupor, and the heavy one bellowed like a bull. "We're here because we're here!" "Because we're here! Because we're here!" they howled in unison. Then he jumped to his feet, tore off his wig, and screamed, his bald head dripping sweat. "Gentlemen, hide and seek! No, blind man's bluff! No, charades! Ha ha! Ho ho! Hee hee!" they whinnied and brayed. "Come fill the cup, and in the fire of spring your winter garment of repentance fling!" cried the cremator, kissing the air. "Gentlemen, I give you, gentlemen, the doctor!" shrieked Dolt. "And the ladies, don't forget the ladies! Ooh la la!" "Hail, hail, the spies are here!" wailed the heavy one, then burped and looked around with a bleary eye, and yawned, revealing a pointed, delicate tongue, an almost feminine tongue. Okay. What in heaven's name was I doing here among these loathsome lowlifes, participating in this revolting, pitiful binge of petty bureaucrats, the crude carousal of clerks? I was filled with horror. "Gentlemen, I give you, our gatekeepers, gentlemen, our cremators, I give you," a voice piped from under the table. "God save the king! I'll drink to that. Confusion to the enemy! Prosit! Long live the Archduke! Skoll!" barked the chorus. I felt sorry for the young man. They were out to get him drunk, constantly filling his glass. The heavy one puffed up and turned purple, looked like he was ready to burst. Only the flabby white neck didn't seem to match the rest of him. He had something to say, so he hurled a bottle to the floor to get everyone's attention, jumped up on a chair, but couldn't speak, gagged on his own laughter, waved his arms frantically for us to wait, and then finally managed to shout, "Riddles! Gentlemen, behold!" Oh, man. "Riddles! Riddles! Riddles! Who's first?" Dolt sang. All right, well, you know, it's the bane of my existence, singing in any of these fucking books. It's always in all of them. All right, here we go. Dolt sang. "Clouds so dark, snow so white, no moon up in the sky. Hug me, kiss me, stay the night. Oh, my darling spy." "Gentlemen, here's number one. Who saw the instructions?" A gale of laughter greeted the question. I shuddered as I watched the shaking bellies, the open mouths. The cremator grabbed the young man, and they laughed until they cried. Again the glasses came together in a circle above the table and clinked. The cremator, like the like one possessed, imprinted passionate kisses upon the air, and Dolt... Sorry, I just lost my place. And Dolt gargled vodka. I noticed a little dent in his nose where the rim of the glasses had hit it. Another false nose. Not that I cared. The heavy one took off his pajama top and wiped his hairy armpits with it. The sweat trickled down his flabby body, and he unbuttoned his false ears. "Oh, give me a peek and some secrets to leak," sang Dolt and the young man in harmony, "where the spies and the counter-spies play." The cremator joined in, off-key. "Where treason is heard, an encouraging word, and there's plenty of men to betray. Gentlemen, riddle number 2. What is marriage?" The heavy one shaked like a hairy woman. "Marriage is the smallest espionage unit," he said, but nobody was listening. Red, screaming faces whirled around me. Was Dolt giving the cremator a sign by wiggling his ears? Impossible. They were both too drunk. Suddenly, Semperek grabbed someone else's glass, gulped it down, and smashed it on the floor. Then he stood up. Vodka and drool dribbled off his red whiskers. "Gentlemen," they yelled, "pay attention. Look at that bearing, gentlemen. He needs a promotion." "Silence," the cremator bawled, deathly pale. He reeled and clutched the table for support, cleared his throat, bared his squirrel-like teeth, and broke into tears, crying, "Alas, my youth, my sacred childhood, the haunts where I want to play. Whither have they fled, and wherefore? Where are the snows of yesteryear? Must all things piss away, that is, pass away?" "Oh, shut up," snapped Dolt. He looked the young man over very carefully, took out another full bottle, and hissed, "Don't you listen to him." And he put the bottle to the young man's lips and pulled back the head, forcing him to drink. The gurgle of the emptying bottle was the only sound in the room. The cremator squinted, cleared his throat, and continued. "Am I not my left hand's keeper? 40 days and 40 nights, my neighbor's ass and much cattle. Behold, I stand before you, violated by existence." He stopped. The young man fell limp into Dolt's arms. Dolt removed the empty bottle and said in a perfectly sober voice, "That'll do." The heavy one grunted, bending over the young man and pushing his eyelids back with a thumb. Evidently satisfied, he let the body drop. It fell with a thud and rolled under the table, where it was soon snoring away. The cremator took his seat, mopped his brow with a handkerchief, adjusted his mustache, and the others, too, began to stir themselves. I couldn't believe my eyes. Everything was coming off. Nose, eyebrows, wrinkles, birthmarks. They were all placed neatly on saucers. Stranger yet, the eyes cleared, the expressions grew more intelligent, the faces lost the dissipated office look. The tall, emaciated one, though actually his cheeks were already filling out, pulled up a chair, gave a worldly smile, and said, "Do forgive us the masquerade. An extremely unpleasant business, to be sure, yet quite unavoidable. Force majeure. Believe me when I tell you that it doesn't come easily to us. If a man imitates a pig, some of the piggishness is bound to rub off on him." "Then he can unpig himself afterwards," the cremator retorted from across the table, looking at his own hands with distaste. I was speechless. The tall one, he was shorter now, leaned against my chair. The cuff of an elegant dress shirt showed from under his pajama sleeve. "The mire and the spire," he mused, "the eternal rhythm of history, the pendulum above the abyss." He raised his head. "Now, you can be our guest in earnest, though I fear our company might prove a bit more academic, a bit too academic for your liking. We do tend to get abstruse at times." "What?" I blurted, not yet over this incredible transformation. "Well, you know, we're all professors here. That's Professor Deluge." He pointed to the heavy one, who was dragging the young man out from under the table and trying, with difficulty, to prop him up against the wall. The trainee was apparently a high-ranking officer, to judge from the uniform that now showed under his pajamas. "Deluge holds a chair in scoposcopy." Scoposcopy? Also, he's an accomplished cabalist and counter-collaborationalist. It was Deluge who doctored half the stars in the galaxy. "Dolt! That's a military secret!" cried the heavy professor in mock dismay. He straightened his clothes, reached for a glass of water, and sprinkled some on his bald head. "A secret? Now?" grinned Dolt. "You sure he's unconscious?" asked the cremator. his face in his hands, apparently fighting the effects of the alcohol he'd consumed. That's right, he snores too loud for such a young man, I said, realizing only now that all along they had been out to drink the young officer, disguised as a trainee, under the table. Young man? Why, he's old enough to be your father, snorted the heavy professor as he patted his bald head dry. You can believe Deluge, he's an old hand at this, Dolt reassured me, and lifted a corner of the tablecloth to let me see that the scholar in question discontinued below the waist. Dummy legs, he explained. Hollow, of course. On occasions like these, eminently practical. So, you're all professors? I mumbled, unfortunately not completely sober. With the possible exception of our colleague the cremator, but then his discipline is interdepartmental, said Dolt. As director of our cadaveristics program and custodian, Custodia eius cremontial similis, he holds a seat in the faculty senate. Then Mr. Semperak really is a cremator? I thought, a cover? No, but you seem to be catching on, yes, he said, nodding in the direction of the snoring. It's hard work to lull suspicions. You shouldn't complain, said the heavy professor. We didn't do it all badly this time. Often one has to stay up all night spinning yarns of bygone spies, plots of yore, operations of old when finks were bold, and so forth and so on. Then all about ultra spies and infrareds, the latest gadgets and gags, caches and tags. You talk yourself blue in the face before they're properly stupefied. And in winter, there's a log crackling on the fire, and we sit around and sing coded carols, and there's always a draft, and I always catch a cold. He sighed. Ah, yes, said the cremator, and he sang with a squirrel-like sarcasm. Deck the halls with mics and wiretaps, fa la 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 la. No more, gatekeeper, I can't stand it, cried Professor Deluge, shuddering. Gatekeeper? I asked. You're surprised we call him gatekeeper? Said Dolt. Professors we may be, but we have our nicknames too, our collegiate monikers. Deluge here was christened Proteus by his fraternity. Gatekeeper, well, in the sense that he guards the gate to the building, the door with only one side, the side facing us. That was unclear, but I didn't dare question him further. So, to ask something, I asked, and what is your field, Professor? Nanosemi, and I teach a seminar on pseudosemiology. Also, I dabble in decerebration and defecation, trepans and bedpans, just a hobby. Such modesty, said Professor Deluge. I'll have you know that our Professor Dolt is the world's greatest authority on blackmail, and that his work, The Anatomy of Treason, is an absolute must for anyone planning to betray his country. But enough of this. Talking makes the throat dry. Nunc est bibendium. And he uncorked a bottle. You mean, I said, thoroughly confused, we're gonna drink again? Good Lord, man, why else are we here? But we already had so much. That drinking doesn't count, and it was only for appearances, the heavy professor patiently explained. Anyhow, we're not drinking cheap vodka and raw wine, but the best cognac, brandy, all vintage stuff. Well, I suppose. The bottle made its way around the table. Its noble contents, ceremoniously sniffed and sipped, soon restored us, lifted our spirits, and softened the memory of our recent trials. From the ensuing conversation, I learned that Professor Dolt had more than a passing interest in ancient Greece. A change of pace? I inquired. Whatever do you mean? Why, the Trojan horse marked the birth of crypto-equestrianism. And think of the unmasking of Circe by Odysseus, or the musical sabotage of the sirens, and the omens, the riddles, the oracles, or take Zeus's infiltration in the guise of a swan. Apropos, Semperak interrupted, do you know the opera Cadaveria Rusticana? Hellenic studies, a veritable gold mine, Dolt continued, ignoring the cremator. Undoubtedly, I agreed. But may I ask, Professor, exactly what the field you mentioned, nanosemi, was it? What it deals with? Of course you may. Nanosemi, yes. Consider first, what is our earthly existence but a never-ending culling of intelligence? We seek to discover nature's secrets. In Rome they had but one name for the scholar-explorer and the scout-agent, speculator. And indeed, the scientist is a spy par excellence, and for that matter, par force. He is humanity's plant in the great lap of existence. He filled my glass. Yes, spying is a man's qualita occulta, and has been taken from earliest times. In the Middle Ages, we have spieries, espials, to spy, spioneren, spilzen, espiner, scopiao. I'm not going to try and do the Slavic ones. Treason, 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 trader, trashon. Matahari, Dreyfus, Delilah, Wallenstein. Verily I say unto you that one of you shall betray me. Machinations, hollowness, treachery, and all ruinous disorders. A treason and a stratagem. I come no spy with purpose to explore the secrets of your realm. We come not single spies, but in battalions. This blessed plot. Oh, but I digress. Where were we? My field, yes. What does it mean? Meaning. And so we enter the realm of semantics. One must tread carefully here. Consider, from earliest times, man did little else but assign meanings to the stones, to the skulls, the sun, other people, and the meanings required that he create theories. Life after death, totems, cults, all sorts of myths and legends, black bile and yellow bile, love of God and country, being and nothingness, and so it went. The meanings shaped and regulated human life, became its substance, its frame and foundation, but also a fatal limitation and a trap. The meanings, you see, grew obsolete in time, were eventually lost. Yet, how could the following generations discard their heritage, particularly when so many of their worthy ancestors had been crucified for these non-existent gods, or had labored long and mightily over that philosopher's stone, phlogiston, ectoplasm, the ether? It was considered that this layering of new meanings upon old was a natural, organic process, a semantic evolution. Yet observe how a phrase like great discovery is bled of sense, devalued, made common coin, until now we give it freely to the latest model of bomb. But do have some more cognac. And he filled my glass. And so, continued Dolt with a thoughtful smile, adjusting his nose, where does this lead us? Demi-semiotics. It's quite simple, really, the taking away of meaning. Oh? I said, and then bit my lip, ashamed of my own ignorance. He took no notice. Yes, meaning must be disposed of, he said heatedly. History has crippled us long enough with its endless explanations, rationizations, mystifications. In my work, we do not simply falsify atoms and doctor the stars. We proceed very slowly, methodically, with the utmost care, to deprive everything, absolutely everything, of its meaning. But isn't that really a kind of destruction? He gave me a sharp look. The others whispered and fell silent. The old officer, propped up against the wall, continued to snore. An interesting observation. Destruction, you say? Consider. When you create something, anything, a rocket or a new fork, there are always so many problems, doubts, complications. But if you destroy, let's use that inaccurate term for the sake of argument, whatever else one may say about it, it is unquestionably clean and simple. So you advocate destruction? I asked, unable to suppress an idiotic grin. Must be the cognac, he said, refilling my glass with a smile. We drank. Besides, we aren't even here, he added. How do you mean? Have you any idea of the mathematical probabilities involved for any given chunk of matter in the universe to be eligible for participation in the biosphere, whether as a leaf, a sausage, or drinkable water, or breathable air? The odds are about 1,000,000,000 to 1 against it. Our universe is a prodigiously lifeless place. One particle in 1,000,000,000,000 may enter into the life cycle, the procession of birth and death, growth and decay. Consider what a rare event that must be. And now I ask you to consider not the probability of a piece of food or of a drop of water or of a breath of air, but the probability of an embryo. Take the ratio of the mass of the universe, the burnt-out suns, the frozen planets, those cosmic garbage dumps we call nebulae, that enormous cloaca of dust and rubble and noxious gas we think of as the Milky Way. All that thermonuclear fermentation, the swirling of debris. Take the ratio of that total mass to the mass of a human body. And then you have your probability for a chunk of matter, equal in weight to a man, to be a man. And that probability is negligible. Negligible, I said. In other words, you and I and all of us in this room, statistically, we can't exist. We aren't really here. What? I blinked, trying to clear my vision. We aren't here, repeated Dolt, and burst out laughing with the others. It was a joke, of course, one of those clever scientific jokes. It didn't strike me as particularly funny, but I laughed to be polite. The empty bottles disappeared, and full ones took their place. I was attentive as the scholars conversed, but understood less and less. I had had too much to drink. Someone, possibly the cremator, held forth on the death agony as a test of strength. Professor Deluge engaged Professor Dolt in a debate on demontogeny and psychophagia, or something like that, and they talked of recent breakthroughs, the machina mystificatrix, and my head kept nodding no matter how hard I tried to sit up straight, and the voices seemed to come from a great distance. "Is he ready?" someone asked. I tried to see who it was, but everything kept revolving. Was I really that drunk? Then I found I couldn't even think. Someone was doing it for me. I floated in a cloud of tiny sparks, latched onto the table, and laid my burning face on it like a dog. Before me was the slender stem of a wine glass, the dainty leg of an elegant goblet, a delicate crystal thigh. I told her I would always be true. I wept in gratitude, and overhead they drank and held forth. Truly, those caps and gowns did hold their liquor well. Then there was nothing, and when I came to, my throbbing head still rested on the table. There were crumbs on my nose. I heard voices. "The universe. I betrayed the universe. Mea culpa, I confess it." "All right, that's enough." "It was my orders, my orders." "Come on, have a glass of water." "Is he asleep?" someone asked. "Don't worry, he's out cold." But there was dead silence when I stirred and opened my eyes. Nothing had changed. The old officer was still snoring away in a corner. Bottles and faces swam before my eyes. "Silentium, gentlemen." "Gaudemius Isidore. Nunc gaudium atquabendum," came a cry from far away. There's no difference, I thought. It's the same as before, except in Latin. Fuck, I knew this chapter was going to have a lot of fucking Latin in it. I should have practiced it. "Gentlemen," shouted Dolt. "Salvatere in re, fortiere modo. Spectator debet esse elegans, penetrans et bedexter. Vivant omnis virgines, gentlemen. Viva la maison! Cheers!" Everything whirled around. Red things, sweaty things, white things, heavy things. Where before they had chortled, "The ladies, ooh la la." Now it was, "Frivolitas in duo corpore, Venus invigilatrix," and more of the same. I tried to ask them why, but no one would listen to me. They jumped on their chairs, delivered speeches, sat down again, sang, danced in a circle. "We did that before," I protested, but they laughed and pulled me along. "Tumba, tumba, tumba ba," boomed the heavy one, and we all joined hands and pranced and stamped our way into an enormous hall. A cold draft from somewhere sobered me up a little, and I looked around. Kind of theatrum anatomicum, a lecture hall with rising tiers of chairs, and in the center, a podium. Lectern, blackboards, erasers, chalk, shelves of specimens preserved in alcohol, and on the table empty jars waiting to be filled. So this was where the commander-in-chief got his supply. A gentleman in black approached our dancing group. The cremator ground to a halt and blew out air like an old locomotive. I uncoupled my car from the train and waited to see what would happen next. "Ah, if it isn't Professor Schnuffel. Welcome, welcome, beloved colleague," cried Deluge, and his greeting echoed and re-echoed. The others also stopped their prancing to bow and shake his hand. The new professor looked quite venerable in his gray hair and tails. "Professor Shuffle, kindly enlighten us on this matter of bottom priority. To wit, what in the hell is it?" bellowed Dolt, and to accentuate his lack of respect, hopped on one leg. "The brain, membra dissecta," replied the old man in black. And indeed, there on the table were large plaster sections of the human brain, all carefully mounted and labeled, resembling marble viscera, or perhaps a modern sculptor's madness. The professor brushed one with a feather duster. "The brain!" Dolt shrieked with glee. "Gentlemen, I give you our pride and joy. The brain!" He lifted his glass. "A toast that is Bacchic, bucolic, and anaclothic." I'll be right. He filled our glasses, then turned and read the labels like a litany. "O Gyrus Fornicatus, he intoned, and the others took up the chorus, howling with laughter. O tuber cinerum, O striatum, O corpora quadrigemina, 4 rounded bodies. Rounded bodies, they roared with delight. The old man in the tuxedo continued his dusting as if nothing had happened. O salitertia, chiasma opticum, mammillary body, chanted Dolt. Mammillary body, yelled the cremator. O hippocampus, pons varioli, O fissure of Ronaldo, duramater, piamater, alma mater. And gentlemen, let us not forget Mater Hari. Careful, there's formaldehyde, cautioned Professor Schnuffle, or Shuffle. Formalin, formaldehyde. They joined hands and dragged the venerable anatomy professor with them, making him their leader and waving his feather duster about like a banner. I sat in one of the chairs and watched, trying to bring things into focus. Drunken shouts and stamping feet boomed and echoed in the dark, and the domed ceiling looked down on us like a monstrous eye. And on a metal stand next to me was a skeleton, stooped and toothless, in an attitude of somber resignation. The left hand was short one finger. I gasped. I looked closer. Something glittered, dangling from a rib. Gold spectacles. Was this, then, his final destination? A display for medical students? And was this to be our third, our final meeting? Was it all to end like this? Catch, gatekeeper, cried Dolt. Hoc locus, ubi troia fuit. Professor Shrapnel, I bestow upon you the Order of the Garter Snake, Denunciado Constructiva, the distinguished noose of honor. Watch out, hissed the gray anatomist, as they recklessly pulled him along, his tails flapping wildly. The warning came too late. They crashed into the shelves and brought everything down. The jars shattered on the floor, the alcohol spilled out, and with it, the matted freaks within. The stench of corruption, bottled up for so many years, now billowed out and filled the auditorium. The revelers fled, leaving the old man to his despair, and I followed him back to our room and slammed the door. More bottles, corks popping, an endless pouring and roaring. So I hid in an armchair and gratefully went out with the tide, wondering only how one could put on gold spectacles if there were no ears left. Overcome with grief, I sank beneath the waves. Suddenly, an apparition got in my way, pale, dripping sweat, unusually long. What a long face you have, Professor, I said, enunciating each syllable with care. The table made a good pillow, but Dolt smiled a wicked, left-handed smile and whispered, Only a worm can play the worm. What a long face, I whispered in alarm. Never mind the face. You know what I am. Certainly, Professor Dolt. Sabotage. No, that's deluge. My mission is to neutralize him. I tried to sit up, but couldn't. What? He must be put out of action. Deluge? Not deluge. Him, you know, the one who rested on the 7th day. And the left side smiled again. The right remained sad. You're joking. Not at all. We've checked, up there in the heavens above. We have our sources, you know. Of course, I muttered. Professor? Yes? Tell me, what's a triple? He gave me a hug and breathed alcohol in my face. I'll tell you. You're young, but you're one of us, and I'm one of us, so I'll tell you everything. Now, say someone's one of us, but he's also, you know, you can tell, right? He's not one of us, I said. Right, you can tell. But sometimes you can't tell. You think someone's one of us, but they got to him, and then he wasn't anymore. And then we got to him, and he was, but he still had to look like he isn't. That is, he only looks like he is. But they get wise to him, and now he isn't again. But he has to look like he isn't, or will get wise. And that's a triple. Of course, I replied. And a quadruple's the same, only more. Exactly. Now, if you like, I'll swear you in. You? Me. But you're a professor. So, I also swear in agents. For which side? You really want to know? Well, you're not so dumb as you look. You'll go far. He chucked me under the chin like a fond father. How very old he looked, and so suddenly. You're not even ticklish, he said with an approving wink. Now tell me, what's galactoplexia? Galactoplexia? Give up? The end of the world. Ha! Could it be that under the influence of the alcohol, the crude office clerk element was winning out over the professorial? My head ached at the thought. Dolt stared at me with his icicle eyes. Somebody was scratching my leg. The cremator surfaced from under the tablecloth, climbed onto my knees, and said, How sweet it is to hear old friends third degree each other, like sniffing a rose in spring, exchanging innocent lies. He wrapped his arms around my neck and whispered, Friend, long-lost brother, name it, it's yours, whatever you want, I'll give you the world. Professor, please, I said, struggling with him. He hung on me like a sack of potatoes and tried to kiss me, pricking my cheeks with his stubbly whiskers, until they pulled him off and he staggered back, holding up a plate. A plate? Wait. I racked my brain. Yes, there was something. Plates. Someone mentioned plates. But who? What did it mean? There was a great commotion. A crowd of people jumped up and ran about. In the middle of the room sat the heavy professor, rocked by violent hiccups, a wet rag on his bald head. The hiccups made a curious counterpoint with the snoring from the corner. Scare him! Frighten him! We gathered in a circle around him. I swayed on rubber legs. He looked at us, confused, gesturing for help. He couldn't speak for the hiccups. The eyes bulged hideously, and the chair creaked beneath him, so powerful were the spasms. He's signaling, hissed the cremator, listening closely and holding his plate high in the air. Hear it? No. No, the heavy one protested, but his protest was lost in a veritable storm of hiccups. Signaling, eh? Dolt said grimly and squeezed my hand. No, I swear. Count them, roared the multitude. We counted the hiccups in ominous chorus. 11, 12, 13. Traitor! Hurled the cremator and pointed an accusing finger. The heavy one turned a deep purple. Sweat poured down his face. He trembled. 14, 15. I waited, my fingers numb in Dolt's iron grip. The heavy one held his breath, bit his fist, but the hiccup came and knocked him off his chair. 6. He shuddered, coughed, and then lay still. Finally, the swollen eyelids flickered open, and peace reigned once more on that flabby face. Thanks, he whispered. Thanks. And we returned to the table as if nothing had happened. I was still drunk, but in a different way. Everything was free and easy, my movements, my speech, and the part of me that always watched and stood guard, that part was gone now, and I greeted its disappearance with gay abandon. Before I knew it, Dolt was lecturing me on the nature of the building's nature. He sang this song. Hey, the building, hey, what makes the building stay? The anti-building makes it stay, hey. Then he spoke of sodomistics and gomorrhoids. I decided to ignore the plate which the cremator was waving at me from across the room. I see it, I yelled in defiance. It's a plate, but I'll do what I want. I don't care. I'm free as a bird. Free as a bird, said Dolt, patting my knee with a left-handed laugh. He inquired into my experiences as a spy, asked how the building was treating me, and so on. I talked. And what happened then? He asked, showing interest. I told him everything, in the strictest confidence, since I still wasn't sure of the others. The priest, Dolt said, was an Abbe Provocateur, one of the little old man in the gold, and of the little old man in the gold spectacles, he had this to say. Serves him right. He completely lost his head in the coffin sequence. Semperak left the table and went to talk something over with the heavy one, who was still in the middle of the room and was pouring water on his head. Possible conspiracy, I said to Dolt, pointing them out. Pish tush, he said. Let's get back to you. What did the doctor say? When he heard the rest of my story, he sighed, solemnly shook my hand, and said, You are distraught, but you needn't be. Look at me, roaring drunk, positively. Sober, it's a different story, but now my heart is open to you. You're one of us, I'm one of us. Do you know what I am? You don't know what I am. You told me. I didn't tell you. Now I'll tell you. Yes, plenipotentiary of transcendental affairs. But that's nothing. Now I'll treat the telth. La maison, c'est moi. I am the building. Triples, quadruples, quintuples, that's nothing. Child's play. Hide and seek. Now here's the building. And here's the anti-building. 2 colossi, since the world began. And everyone, you understand, has been approached by now. The building consists entirely of enemy agents. The anti-building is ours, down to the last man. Of course, I said, trying desperately not to believe this unbelievable revelation. Everyone's a plant. Infiltration is complete. Complete and mutual. Ours pretend to be ours, theirs, theirs, so everything remains the same. The same? The building stands firm by virtue of the fact that ours became theirs over a span of many years, gradually, plant by plant, keeping the structure, the system intact. Everything was carefully preserved. Ranks, promotions, decorations, unmaskings, regulations, security precautions, surveillance, office procedures and routines, seals and signatures, everything in triplicate. And so, by the grace of almighty bureaucracy in the building, did the building remain true to itself, keep the faith, and in turn, betrayal to unswerving loyalty. Amazing, I exclaimed, all goose flesh. But true, my boy, but true. Consider that the business of entrapment, blackmail, planting an agent requires the utmost security, absolute secrecy, otherwise you risk exposure, and the game is up. Hence, only one of theirs there knows about a given one of theirs here, and vice versa. Also, since his superiors and subordinates think he's one of ours, he must report for work like everyone else, take and give orders, track down enemy agents in earnest, and neutralize them. Thus, he does the building's work. And if in the line of duty he should happen to steal or photograph a few secret documents, no harm is done. The information goes there, to the anti-building, and into the hands of our people. And vice versa? I whispered, awed by the vision of treachery on such a scale. Yes, unfortunately. Clever of you to observe that. And the shooting in the hall, and the suicides. My question must have hit a nerve. His face clouded over. His mouth gave a left-handed twitch. There are slip-ups now and then, leaks, and there are quotas to meet. The building continues to recruit and swear in new agents. It dare not stop, and complications result. For example, a double might unmask a triple that's really a quadruple. Situations hardly improved by the recent appearance of sextuples and septuples. Over-enthusiastic types. And the spy in the bathroom, what about him? Who knows? A freelance, perhaps, a maverick, a gentleman of the old school, an unreconstructed liberal, a dreamer, the kind that waits and hopes to seize the document of documents, the secret of secrets, single-handed, idle fancies, since only the collective can achieve anything, and he knows this, and that is why he despairs. Then what should I do? Above all, get involved. Take sides. Don't slip into the pit of self-pity and escape his fantasies. It's the little individual, remember, that ends up caught between the devil and the deep blue sea. The cremator held up 2 plates. I waved him away. Could you be more specific? Diversify, dig in, hold out, buy low, sell high, and to thine own self be true. I see. There's one other thing. How is it you know so much about the building if everything's supposed to be so secret? After all, you said that... But the cremator came up and interrupted me with his plates. I'm not interested in your plates, I cried, pushed him away, and turned adult. I mean, how do you know? Know what? Know what you were just telling me. I know? You know, how both camps infiltrated one another, mutually, to the last man, and how the building was really the anti-building, and vice versa, and treason wasn't treason, but loyalty. How did you find this all out? How? He said, inspecting his fingernails. I'm asking you. Me? He looked up and gave me an icy stare. Yes, how did I what? The room was silent. Too silent. You know, find all this out. I don't know, he said with a sneer. What you're talking about. I turned pale, the words stuck in my throat, and I realized suddenly that the officer in the corner was no longer snoring, but getting up, stretching, removing his pajamas and straightening his uniform, then walking briskly up to us and saying, "Are you prepared to testify that this employee, known under the name of Dolt, alias Professor of Nanosemi and Demiseriotics, alias the false statistician, alias Screw, alias Plowderton, did willfully slander and abuse the building, and did attempt by such slander and abuse to entice you to high treason, lèse-maison, insubordination, non-provocation, unsabotage, and null espionage, and that the said Dolt did contrive to ensnare you thereby in his nefarious snares, schemes, and coils?" I looked around. The heavy one stroked his flabby neck. Dolt fixed his wide, expressionless eyes on me. The cremator had turned his back to us and was examining his plates, as if refusing to acknowledge what was taking place. "In the name of the building, I call you forth to bear testimony and witness against this man," said the officer severely. Numb, I shook my head. The officer stepped forward, seemed to trip, grabbed me to right himself, and whispered in my ear, "Idiot, this is your mission." Then he stepped back and said in the same stern tone, "Speak! We are waiting." I looked to the others for help. They looked away. Dolt began to tremble. Yes, I mumbled. "Yes, what?" "Well, he said some things." "Treasonous things?" "No, I swear!" screamed Dolt. "Silence!" The officer turned to me. "Go on." "Well, he did say that treason was loyalty." "Treason? Loyalty?" "In a sense, that is. We were talking in general." "Did he say it or not?" "He did," I whispered, and after a moment of silence, they burst out laughing. The heavy one held his belly and bounced in his chair. Dolt wheezed, and the officer, young again, danced around the table and yelled, "He did it! He read it! He squealed! He sang!" "Stool pigeon, tattletale, stool pigeon, tattletale," they crowed, doubled up with laughter. Only the cremator remained aloof, watching the scene with a sardonic smile. "Enough," said Dolt, triumphant. "It is time for us to go." The heavy one buttoned his collar. The young officer, weary but satisfied, rinsed his mouth out with seltzer. They completely ignored me. I was stunned, speechless. Dolt picked up his briefcase and thermos, threw his suit over his shoulder, and strode out, arm in arm with the heavy one. The cremator turned around to the door and pointed elegantly at the plates left on the table. This clearly meant, "I gave you the signs. You have only yourself to blame." Only the young man remained, and he was leaving. I stood in his way. He stopped. I clutched his arm. "It was all a game, wasn't it? How could you?" Please, sir," he said, trying to free his arm, but evidently too embarrassed to look me in the eye. "That was the onion." "The onion?" "Well, that's what it's called in the tactical nomenclature. Even our jokes are classified, code names." "That was a joke?" "Don't be angry, sir. It was no picnic for me either to lie there and snore all that time, but, orders are orders." And he shrugged. "Just tell me, what was the point of it all?" "It isn't that simple, sir. I mean, in a way, it was just a joke, really, for you at least. The professor might have wanted to watch the reactions." "My reactions?" "No, Semper Rex. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to be off. And really, there's nothing for you to worry about. You're in the clear." He skipped out like a schoolboy, giving the cupboard a tap on the way. I was alone with the remains of the party. Overturned chairs, leftovers, dirty plates, broken plates, crumbs, bottles, wine-stained tablecloth, a dismal scene. There was someone knocking, but the room was empty. The knocking returned, more persistent. I listened closely. 1, 2, 3, 4 taps. It sounded like wood. The cupboard! The key was in the lock. I turned it over, and the door slid open by itself. Inside, hunched over, sat Father Orfini. He wore a cassock over his uniform and held a pile of papers on his knee. He didn't notice me at first. He was writing something. At last he finished, dotted an I, put a period, then stretched his legs, got off his little stool, and stepped out of the cupboard, pale and serious. End of chapter 11. Woo! I have completely lost my voice. So we're definitely not going any further. Thank you so much for joining me tonight on the program. Hope you had a great time. Next week we will be finishing the book. No matter what. But now, it is bedtime. And in my mind, yeah, probably. Good night.